Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am super excited to start this new year off by talking about one of my all-time favorite things, and that's Magic the Gathering. If you guys didn't know me, I absolutely love Magic. I play every Friday at my local game store, and being that I've been kind of bored and tired and worn out with all of the gacha games that I've been playing lately, this is kind of new and refreshing for me, and I am super excited to get started talking about it on my channel and sharing my interests with you. Today we are going to be covering none other than Savra, Queen of the Golgari. She is my absolute favorite Golgari commanders. If you love Golgari Graveyard shenanigans, you're in for a treat, so let's just dive in. So firstly, obviously, we have to talk about our commander, Miss Savra, Queen of the Golgari. She is a 2 black-green 2/2 legendary creature that says whenever you sacrifice a black creature, you may pay 2 life, and if you do, each other player sacrifices a creature, and whenever you sacrifice a green creature, you may pay 2 life. So Savra is like our big main star of the show here. Her ability gives us a powerful advantage over our opponents, being that our opponents aren't going to have creatures to block with or attack us with. She is basically a Grave Pact enchantment, but in the command zone, and that is something that I don't think a lot of people realize about her, is that she is broken. So basically what we're trying to do with this deck is control the board by sacrificing our creatures to therefore trigger other effects, meaning our opponents will sacrifice the creatures and they will also lose life, as we are also running a little bit of an Aristocrats package. We'll get into that here in just a minute. So starting off with the Aristocrats package, we have Bastion of Remembrance. The only line of text on this that really matters is whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And obviously when it enters, you get a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Now obviously this will not trigger Savra, but it is still an extra token that you can either use to chump block or sacrifice with later. It will still count towards your sacrifice triggers, so it's not entirely useless, just not obviously the main point. The main point is that second line of text there. We also have Zulaport Cutthroat, which basically says the same thing but on a creature. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And we also have Blood Artist that says whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The key thing to note is that Blood Artist is targeted, so if you and another opponent are the clear threats at the table, you can definitely knock that other player down a peg, or if somebody is only a couple points of life away from losing the game, you can just have Blood Artist drain them of their last remaining life, and now it will be down to 3 people in your pod. It's got a little bit of Magic the Gathering table politics shenanigans going on, which is great in general. So next up, let's go ahead and talk about our ramp package. We have 2 artifacts, just Arcane Signet and Soul Ring. They're pretty standard in almost every commander deck. And then we also have Birds of Paradise as our mana dork. Next up, we have Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 visits. Farseek will let us search for any land that is not a forest unless it is a dual land, and then we can shuffle our library. Nature's Lore and 3 visits are both basically the same card. Search your library for a forest, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle, and these come onto the battlefield untapped, which is very nice. Next up, we have Sakura Tribe Elder Steve. This guy is not only a sacrifice outlet, but also ramps us. He will let us get a basic land enter onto the battlefield tapped, and then we shuffle. And last but not least, this is a personal favorite card of mine, and honestly, I don't know why more people don't run it in their sacrifice decks. This piece is just great. It's Primal Growth. You pay 2 and a green for a sorcery with a kicker cost of sacrificing a creature. You can search your library for a basic land, put that card into play untapped, and then shuffle your library. If you pay the kicker cost, instead you can search for 2 basic lands, put them into play, and shuffle. So this is absolutely 100% way better than like a Rampant Growth or like a Kodama's Reach, because not only is it a sacrifice trigger, but it's also a ramp, and you get 2 basic lands untapped, and they don't have to be the same color, which a lot of basic land ramping that gets you 2 basic lands require you to get 2 basic lands of the same color. So if you really could have used an extra green and a black to play something, you can actually grab a forest and a swamp from this. It doesn't have to be the same basic land type, which is really nice. Next, we'll go ahead and talk about our card draw package. We have Deadly Dispute. This is pretty much a staple in every black deck that I know of, and it's also a staple in almost every sacrifice deck that I know of. Deadly Dispute is just absolutely great for 1 and a black and sacrificing an artifact or creature as an additional cost. You can draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. So not only does this trigger our sacrifice triggers, but we also get 2 card draws and we get a little bit of ramp with a treasure token. Next up, we have Death Reap Ritual, which is an enchantment that says at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, you may draw a card. We have Grim Haruspex. This is a recent addition to the deck that I made. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. Next, we have Izoni Thousand-Eyed. So she is a little bit of both card draw and token generation. She has Undergrowth that says when Izoni Thousand-Eyed enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard. They are black and green, meaning that they will trigger both halves of Savra's ability. And then of course we can pay a black and a green, sacrifice another creature, gain a life, and draw a card. We have Moldervine Reclamation, which is basically another Death Reap Ritual, except for whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life and draw a card. Again, just really nice life gain and card draw, and it is not non-token, which is also really great. So we can just sacrifice our tokens and this will pop off for us. We have Morbid Opportunist. Whenever 1 or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn. Morbid Opportunist is really great because this guy does not trigger just off of our creatures dying. It triggers off of our opponent's creatures dying, which is great. The once per turn is still plenty of card draw because we're basically always going to get at least 1 card draw each turn that our opponents get and each turn that we get. We'll get back to Mosswood Dread Knight here in just a moment. I want to look at Plumb the Forbidden. This card is absolutely busted. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice 1 or more creatures, and when you do, you copy this spell for each creature sacrificed this way, you draw a card, and you lose a life. So Plumb the Forbidden basically says, oh hey, I'm just going to sacrifice 5 creatures, draw 5 cards, gain 5 life. That is how good this is. And not only do you get 5 card draw and 5 life in our example, that's also 5 creatures that your opponents have to sacrifice. Next up, we have Ravenous Amulet. This is also a fairly recent addition. This card does a little bit of everything. So we can pay into it, tap and sacrifice a creature to draw a card, and then put a soul counter on this artifact. Activate only as a sorcery, which honestly is not that big of a deal. The fun part though, for its second ability, we can play it at instant speed. So we can pay 4, tap, sacrifice this artifact, and then each opponent loses life equal to the number of soul counters on it. I don't think people realize like how good of a card this is, and I think a lot of people will, yes, it is expensive because you do have to pay into it, but we're running such a low mana curve anyway that more often than not, we're going to have some extra mana left over, and this is just the perfect way to put that extra mana in and be able to get some payoff from it. Next up is Reckoner's Bargain. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature. This is basically another Deadly Dispute where we get to draw 2 cards, but instead of pinning a treasure token, we just gain life equal to the sacrifice permanent's mana value. Season of Loss is also another fairly recent addition that I had to this deck, but honestly, this is just so perfect. For 3 and 2 black for a sorcery, it is a modal card, so you can choose up to 5 paws worth of modes, and you may choose the same mode more than once. So you can pay 1 paw and each player sacrifices a creature. You can pay 2 paws and draw a card for each creature you controlled that died this turn, or each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. And then next up we have Vampiric Rites. This is a really cheap sacrifice outlet that lets us gain a life and draw a card, and because it is a very cheap mana cost, both in casting and for the sacrifice trigger, we can start doing our shenanigans right away, which is really great. We have Village Rites, which is as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature and draw 2 cards. Basically just a cheaper version of Deadly Dispute and Reckoner's Bargain. We don't get anything else but the 2 card draw, but honestly, that's card draw is always great, and being that it's so cheap and the fact that it's an instant that we can use on an opponent's turn, even better for us. So I said that I was gonna get back to Mosswood Dread Knight, and I'm getting back to him now because he is just absolutely broken in this deck. So for 1 and a green, you get a 3/2 trample knight creature that says when it dies, you may cast it from your graveyard as an adventure until the end of your next turn. So you sacrifice your Mosswood Dread Knight to an ability. And then when it's in the graveyard, you can pay the 1 and a black to put it on an adventure. And that adventure says that whenever you draw a card and you lose a life. This is repeatable, guys. If your opponents do not exile this, you can get card draw every single turn for basically free. This is a real life thing that happened. I was playing Friday Night Magic like I usually do, and I had an opponent who was like, okay, you have had enough card draw. Mosswood Dread Knight needs to go away. That is how you know how good a card is. Being able to just have constant card draw all the time off of a singular creature is just absolutely insane. And the fact that it recurs itself is even better. That means that you can save all of your recursion spells for better things. Speaking of recursion, let us look at our recursion package. We have Altar of Baal. This is, I didn't realize how good this artifact was until I started actually using it. You pay 2 and a black, tap it, exile a creature you control, which is more often than not going to be a token. You can you can return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. Honestly, the sorcery speed isn't even a problem. This is just nice, easy access to recursion. And being that we're going to make a decent amount of tokens, more often than not, we won't have to worry about exiling any of our key pieces. Next up, we have Balaged Recovery. Everybody loves Balaged Recovery. It is a DMFC, meaning that is a dual-faced modal card. So we can either play the spell on the front or use it as a land from the back side. Obviously, if we have it enter as a land, it enters tapped, gives us a green mana, no big deal. We're gonna mostly be saving it for its sorcery side here. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. This can not only grab us creatures, this can grab us instants and sorceries, this can grab us enchantments, this can grab us artifacts, this can grab us anything, this can grab us a land if we really wanted it to. But this is just absolutely a really, really good card And we're gonna skip over to Eternal Witness, because Eternal Witness is basically the same thing but on a creature. So if you guys don't know what I'm getting at here, you Balaged Recovery, you go get your one of your really overpowered enchantments back. Like, you can grab Oversouled Cemetery, you can grab Grave Pact, whatever. Balaged Recovery is now in the grave, right? You play Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness can get you that Balaged Recovery back. Eternal Witness itself can grab you your Grave Pact, your Oversouled Cemetery, your whatever. And because it's on a creature, you're more often than not going to be able to get Eternal Witness back more often than you would your Balaged Recovery. So these two in a combo, like, absolutely amazing. Next up, we have Call of the Death Dweller. Return up to 2 target creature cards with total converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a Death Touch counter on either of them, and then put a Menace counter on either of them. Next up, we have Journey to Eternity, which is also another DMFC. Yay! So Journey to Eternity is an enchantment aura that when it enters the battlefield, you enchant creature you control. When enchanted creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control, which is basically just free recursion. And then Journey to Eternity gets returned to the battlefield transformed, which turns itself into a land at Zal Cave of Eternity. This can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, or we can pay 3 black-green and return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. We're going to be using this ability fairly often. It's just free recursion on a land, and not a lot of people run land removal, so we are pretty much always going to have access to this recursion. Next up, we have Lich Knight's Conquest. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens. Most often than not, we're going to be choosing the tokens, but if we can live without an enchantment for a turn, which again, we can get back with Balaged Recovery and Eternal Witness, we can sacrifice those 2 and then return that many creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. Malakir Rebirth. This is a really fun card. For a black mana and on an instant, you can choose target creature, you lose 2 life, and until end of turn, that creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. Super broken card. It's also a DMFC. You can play it as a land on the backside if you so choose. Mostly, again, we're going to be using it for this front instant side because it's just free recursion, more or less. And next up, we have Oversouled Cemetery. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This is recursion every single turn. Next up, we have Reanimate, and again, very classic spell. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its mana value. This can get you your things. This can also get you your opponent's things, which is even better for you because you can then use your opponent's creature from their graveyard and use it to sacrifice later to get payoffs for you, and your opponents are all going to pay for it. Rise of the Witch King is a really awesome card. It is 2 black-green for a sorcery. Each player sacrifices a creature. If you sacrifice a creature this way, which obviously you're going to do, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is not creature restrictive. This card is, again, like an Eternal Witness or a Balaged Recovery, but only instead of going to your hand, it goes straight back onto the battlefield, meaning your Grave Pact is always going to be active. Next up, we have Victimize, a very classic sacrifice-based card that I've run in every sacrifice deck that I've ever made. You pay 2 and a black for a sorcery, choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature, and if you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. It doesn't matter what creatures, like if our creatures are tapped or not, because we're not attacking with them. Oh no, We're just sacrificing them and draining our opponents. So them entering the battlefield tapped does absolutely nothing to slow us down. This is just absolutely great. And we get 2 creatures back for the price of 1 going into the graveyard. Even better. And then next up, we have Whisperblood Liturgist. She is not only a sacrifice outlet for us, but she is also a recursion spell all in one. We can tap her, sacrifice 2 creatures, and return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now we're gonna get into the fun things. We're gonna start getting into some fun stuff. Starting off with our removal package. This is gonna get gross. We have plenty of creature removal based on our sacrifice triggers. So a lot of the average removal that we're going to be running will be targeting non-land permanents. So basically artifacts and enchantments, planeswalkers, anything that can give us issues. So let's get started with Beast Within. 2 and a green for an instant, destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Giving them a small token is the smallest price to pay for being able to remove a really problematic planeswalker, enchantment, whatever. We have Cankerbloom and Insidious Fungus. Insidious Fungus is a fairly recent card that came out with Duskmourn, and as soon as I saw it, I knew that I had to have it in this deck. They basically do very similar things. Cankerbloom, everybody loves it. It's 1 and a green for a creature that you can pay 1 generic mana, sacrifice it, and destroy target artifact, enchantment, or proliferate. Proliferate's not gonna be that big of a deal for us, but the destroying target artifact and enchantment will. And Insidious Fungus, again, is basically the same thing. Slightly cheaper upfront cost. But the sacrifice is a little bit more. You pay 2, and again, you can sacrifice it and choose to either destroy target artifact, enchantment, or instead of proliferate here, we have draw a card, and then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. This is busted in this deck. You not only get a sacrifice trigger, you get removal, but you also get card draw and ramp in a 1 mana cost creature. This card is broken. At least in this deck, it's broken. I don't know why more people aren't running this. This is such a good card. Next up, we have Reclamation Sage. Is again another creature with removal attached to it. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. Next up, we have Gaze of Granite. Is X, 2 black and a green. Destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X or less. Yes, this will hit our enchantments and our artifacts that are really important game pieces for us. But again, with our recursion package, we'll be very, very likely to get those main key pieces back, and it's just board wipe for everybody else, which is great. Next up, we have Mortality Spear. It's 2 black green. This spell costs 2 less to cast if you gain life this turn. Most of the time, we're going to be gaining life, so this will more often than not always just cost us the 2 colored pips, and we get to destroy target non-land permanent, which is wonderful. We have Putrefy, which is I would say a fairly staple card in most Golgari decks. Destroy target artifact or creature, and it can't be regenerated. Obviously, not a ton of creatures regenerate themselves, but it's always just a nice to have just in those weird off chance scenarios. And then lastly, we have Pest Infestation. Again, this card is just absolutely amazing. You pay 2x and a green for a sorcery. You can destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments, and create twice X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens with when this creature dies, you gain a life. Those pest creature tokens are going to be very handy for us, again, because they are black and because they are green. They are going to trigger both halves of Savra. We will generally always be gaining life from the pest tokens, more than what we would be paying for Savra's ability, and all of our opponents will have their creatures removed once again. Speaking of sacrifice pieces, we have 9 of them. These are our kind of main pieces here. We have Season of Loss again, which I put in both the card draw and the sacrificers because they do both. Next up, we have Butcher of Malakir. And whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Basically, this is, again, Grave Pact on another creature. Also, it's just a little bit more expensive. Again, not that big of a deal. But it is also a flying blocker, so in the off chance that your opponents still have a flying creature around by the time it gets to their turn, you can just jump block with it. This will die, and then they will have to sacrifice their remaining flyer. No big deal for you, because you can always bring Butcher of Malakir back. Next up, we have basically 4 other cards that do more or less the same thing. We have Demon's Disciple, which when it enters, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Again, this is great because planeswalkers are a lot of the time really hard to remove. Being able to get rid of those problematic planeswalkers is nice for us. And then we have Fleshbag Marauder. When it enters, each player sacrifices a creature. Merciless Executioner, same thing. When it enters, each player sacrifices a creature. And Plague Crafter, again, when it enters, each player sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker, and each player who can't discards a card. Again, I put Ravenous Amulet in here because it is a sacrifice outlet for us, and it's all around just a really good card. We have Shieldred's Edict, which is absolutely amazing. 1 and a black for an instant that says each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature, a creature token, or a planeswalker. You choose one of the 3 modes, and being that you can have your opponent sacrifice a non-token creature, if your opponents are running a token creature heavy deck, then they are forced to not just chump sacrifice one of their rinky-dink tokens, they have to now get rid of one of their key creatures for their deck, which is a big loss for them, big win for us. And last but not least, for our sacrifice package, we have the big hitter. We have Grave Pact. This is 1 and 3 black for an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. Obviously, this does not have to be off of us sacrificing our creatures. This could be off of our opponents killing our creatures, whether through combat and we block, or whether through just kill spells, etc., etc. This card is just absolutely broken. It is, in my opinion, a must-have for every sacrifice-based deck. We are on to, I believe, our last couple sections for the deck. We have token generators. I happen to have this Compy Swarm copy, and I didn't realize how absolutely broken this was going to be. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, doesn't have to be your creatures, it could be your opponent's creatures. If a creature died this turn, create a tapped token that is a copy of Compy Swarm. These guys will infinitely multiply. This is kind of like Skewed Swarm, but instead of landfall, it's creatures dying. And because it is both black and green, if you do happen to sacrifice one of the token copies of it, that will trigger both halves of Savra, which is absolutely amazing, and we love it. Next up, we have Ghoulish Procession and Jadar. Now, these guys kind of counteract each other a little bit, but there is a workaround. Starting off with Jadar, at the beginning of your end step, if you control no creatures with Decayed, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. And Ghoulish Procession, whenever 1 or more non-token creatures die, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, and this ability triggers only once each turn. So basically what you want to do is, on your end step, you have a 2/2 black zombie. Ghoulish Procession will then give you a another zombie on each of your opponent's turns. And then because those zombies have decayed, when you go to combat, you swing with those decayed zombies. They will then sacrifice themselves at the end of combat, meaning that not only will your opponents have to sacrifice creatures because of your sacrifice triggers, etc., etc., that means that you will also not have any more decayed zombies, which will then trigger Jadar again on your end step. So you will always have at least one decayed zombie that you can use as sacrifice fodder for yourself, which is wonderful. Next up, we have Namada Primeval Warden. She is a 2 black-green 3/4 creature with reach, which again is a nice blocker against flyers if your opponents happen to have any that sneak through your sacrifice triggers. If a creature an opponent controls would die, you exile it instead. And then obviously when we do exile those creatures, we get to create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token. Again, they are green, so they will trigger the second half of Savra's ability, gaining us life gain. But however, Namada has sacrifice triggers to herself. We can sacrifice the sapperlings that she creates to give her either +2/+2 until end of turn. Makes her a little bit beefier. We're mostly not going to be using that, but we do have the sacrifice 2 sapperlings and draw a card ability, which we'll use more often than the other one. Again, it's card draw, but it is mostly just here for the token generation. Next up, we have Ogre Slumlord. Whenever another non-token creature dies, again, this doesn't have to be your non-token creature, it could be your opponent's. You may create a 1/1 black rat creature token. This is not a once per turn, this is every single time a non-token creature dies, you get a rat. And they are black rat creature tokens, which will trigger the first half of Savra's ability, which is what we want because we want to sacrifice those rats, make our opponents have to sacrifice creatures. And as a nice little bonus, all of our rats will have Death Touch. We have Ophiomancer, which is absolutely amazing. At the beginning of each upkeep, if you control no snakes, you create a 1/1 black snake with Death Touch. Again, you can use it as a nice little chump block if needed, but we're mostly just having it here to always have a black snake to sacrifice and be able to trigger Savra's ability. We have Tend the Pests, which is again another really nice thing. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. And this is an instant, which is great, so we can do it on our opponent's turn. And then we create X black and green pest creature tokens with when this creature dies, you gain a life, and X is the sacrifice creature's power. So if we just so happen to have stolen one of our opponent's really big stompy creatures, we can then tend the pests with it, being able to get us a ton of pests, which will obviously trigger both halves of Savra. I do have a little Teehee I Win card in here. Gray Merchant, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So if your devotion to black is 20, each opponent will lose 20 life, and you will gain 60 life. That is well over your starting life total. This will close out the game for you. And last but not least, outside of our lands, which I will get to, we have 3 really kind of fun pieces. I have them labeled as fun pieces in my deck because they are not only very helpful and very synergistic to us, but they can let us do some really, really fun shenanigans. And it's great. So we have a 9 lives familiar here. This creature enters the battlefield with 8 revival counters on it if you cast it, which obviously we are wanting to do. When this creature dies, if it had a revival counter on it, return it to the battlefield with 1 fewer revival counter at the beginning of the next end step. This creature is so broken. You can sacrifice this cat 9 times. And because it is a black creature card, Savra will see that it is a black creature card being sacrificed, and your opponents will have to then sacrifice This card is so good. If your opponents do not take care of this, this will get out of hand very, very quickly. Next up, we have also a recent addition to the deck, Gisa Glorious Resurrector. She is 2 and 2 black for a 4/4 creature that says if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. This is very similar to Namada with its exiling if a opponent's creature would die, but the second line of text is what we're really after here. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put all creature cards exiled with Gisa Glorious Resurrector onto the battlefield under your control and they gain Decayed. Here's where the fun happens. So Gisa Glorious Resurrector says, okay, everybody's creatures have died. All of those are going to go in their own little exile pile, and when it comes around to my turn, all of those will go onto the battlefield with Decayed. If you don't know what Decayed means that when you attack with those creatures, they get sacrificed at the end of combat, triggering all of your sacrifice things. So not only do you steal your opponent's creatures, you get to attack your opponents with their own creatures, and then you get to make them sacrifice any remaining creatures that they had when they declared their blockers, and then their whole board is wiped all over again. And then because all of those creatures died, they're ready for you right at the next turn. This card is just so absolutely fun in this deck. I'm very excited to use it more because, oh my gosh, the things that you could pull off with this are amazing. Next up, we have Tergrid, God of Fright. Everybody loves Tergrid, right? Right? Tergrid is a 3/2 black legendary god with power and toughness for 5 with menace. Not that that really matters too much for us. Her main deal is whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, but most often than not going to be a non-token creature, or they discard a permanent card, aka with Plague Crafter, we can put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This is really, really fun because if that permanent happens to be a planeswalker, you get to steal your opponent's planeswalkers. If your opponent just so happens to discard, I don't know, a Doubling Season, maybe a second Grave Pact that they, you know, had no choice but to get rid of because it was the best option, you can steal their Grave Pact and then you can have 2 or 3 if you include Savra in that. That could be up to 3 different triggers going off all at once. It's board wipe central. Even like if your opponents discard a land, you can take their land and be up mana. This card is just so good for so many decks that include black in their color identity. This card is just so good. Like, obviously it is an MDFC on the backside. We have Tergrid's Lantern. We're not going to be using this too much, honestly. Target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Or we can, and then we can pay 3 and a black to untap it. Again, we're not going to be using Tergrid's Lantern very much, but we are definitely going to be using Miss Tergrid, God of Fright. And lastly, let's get into our lands. Starting off with the basic lands, we're running 9 forests and 10 swamps. We have 12 dual lands, which are Command Tower, Darkboar, and Slitherboar Pathway. We have Deathcap Glade here. We have Golgari Rot Farm, Haunted Mire, Llanowar Wastes, Necroblossom Snarl, Nurturing Peatland, Tainted Wood, Twilight Mire, Underground Mortuary, and Woodland Cemetery. Golgari Rot Farm is amazing to be able to bounce back some of our utility lands like Bajuka Bog, etc. Next up, we have the Nurturing Peatland, which is amazing because we can tap and sacrifice it to draw a card. And then we have Underground Mortuary. This enters the battlefield tapped, but it is searchable, which is key for us. And when it enters the battlefield, you surveil one. So you look at the top card of your library, you may put it into your graveyard. Again, it's not going to matter if those things are in our graveyard because most of the time we're going to be able to get them back. And the utility lands, because I mentioned them earlier, we have Bojuka Bog. Enters the battlefield tapped, and it exiles all cards from target player's library. Then we have Grim Backwoods. We can obviously tap it for mana, or we can pay it 2 black-green, sacrifice a creature, which again triggers our sacrifice pieces, and we get to draw a card. So even better for us. Speaking of card draw, we're going to be drawing a ton of cards. So we have a Reliquary Tower, giving us no maximum hand size. Most of the time this isn't going to be a big deal, but it is nice to have just in case. And lastly, we have Myriad Landscape. This is not only just colorless mana if we need it right away, and later on though, if we are missing a couple pips of colored mana, we can go grab those basic lands that share a land type. Again, part of the reason why I run Primal Growth is not only is it a sacrifice trigger, but it gets 2 basic lands that don't share a land type. So that really helps with kind of counteracting the same Z with Myriad Landscape a little bit. All right, guys, and that's everything that I have to cover for my personal Savra deck. I'm super excited to keep playing her in all of my Friday Night Magic games. I will leave a link down in the description below to my Mox field with her deck, and there should be a couple other decks that I have listed publicly for you guys to also view if you'd like to check those out. As I said at the beginning of the video, I'm super excited to share my love of Magic the Gathering with you all. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.